Hey, Rob B here with Rob D. Now, one of the companies that Rob and I run is a property development company, but we are by no means masters of our subject. So what's the best way to learn? Well, it's to interview a master of that subject. This week, Rob and I learn how to build a £100 million property development company.
Yes, welcome to the Property Podcast, where every Thursday morning property investors come together to be informed and inspired. And there is so much inspiration in this week's episode, where we're joined by Tom Bloxham, co-founder of Urban Splash. If you know about Urban Splash, then you'll be very excited to hear that. If you don't, then be prepared to be blown away by some of the things we've done. So that's coming up, and stick around afterwards, where in Hub Extra, we've got a resource that's going to save you $10,000.
So Rob, in the news this week, possibly the greatest property news piece we've ever done. Who's involved?
Could this possibly be some research by a fine institution called the Property Hub? I think it just might be.
Yes, the news story this week could be from multiple publications because this story has been covered in multiple publications. But we've chosen Landlord today, and the link will be in the show notes, which you can find at thepropertyhub.net/Tom1. And all these news stories, Rob, cover the survey that we featured a few weeks ago on the podcast.
Yeah, it's been absolutely plastered all over the property press in the last week or so. And it's a rare chance to put out a positive news story, which is something that we like to do. The headline that they've gone with is "No deal Brexit will not deter most landlords from expanding their portfolio." And this is based on something from our survey, where we found that 77% of the people we surveyed, and it was a large number who we surveyed, said that they're going to be buying at least one property next year. And 70% of those respondents saying that even a no-deal Brexit wouldn't affect their plans to grow their portfolios. And there's lots of other stats in there as well, but all broadly positive, all around the theme of investors basically realising that they're trying to build something for the long term and not being put off by all the things that happen month to month, year to year. It's a theme that we come back to repeatedly on the podcast. So it's really pleasing to see this is a view that Hub members seem to share, and good to have a chance to actually put this out into the press and have some good news for a change.
So in a world of negativity, we're pleased that we're able to bring a slice of positivity to the property news this week.
Now, today is the first Thursday of the month, and as you should know by now, that means that Property Hub meetups are happening all across the country and beyond. If you've not booked your place yet, it's free to do so. You just need to get over to thepropertyhub.net/meetups. And if you are going along, then have a fantastic evening. We know you will.
So today we're catching up with Tom Bloxham. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Tom, well, you're in for a real treat. Tom is the chairman and founder of Urban Splash. With almost 400 awards for design, architecture and regeneration, this is a truly inspiring story. They specialise in refurbing and developing existing city centres and bringing areas of towns and cities to life that people have previously just ignored. To date, they've undertaken more than 60 schemes across the UK and invested nearly £1 billion into regenerating projects across the country. Tom was awarded an MBE for his services to architecture and urban regeneration. So we're in for a real treat today.
So Tom, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you on the podcast. For anyone who doesn't know, maybe you could start by telling us a little bit more about what Urban Splash does.
Urban Splash is a private property company, been going for 25 years now, and we try to do what it says on the tin, which is make a splash in our towns and cities. I suppose we were best known originally for taking on some quite challenging, difficult, typically listed buildings and bringing them back into use as loft apartments and managed workspace and various other weird and wonderful uses. And more recently, we moved in quite a big way into modular housing built in factories.
Urban Splash today is a huge company, but when you started out, what was the original vision?
Well, I wish I could say there was some sort of big mad vision. It wasn't really. It was literally two men in a shed with a bit of an idea, seeing that actually in Liverpool and Manchester in the time when we were living there, this is going back to 1993, I think, were very rundown cities. No one lived in the city centre. And yet we saw all these amazing buildings lying empty in the city centre on the upper floors. And we thought, wouldn't it be great to use some great designers, some great architects and bring them back to life and fill them with people living and working and playing in the city centres.
And what was the first project you took on?
We started with a little project called Concert Square in Liverpool, which is an old chemical factory. It had been empty for many, many years. And sort of Jonathan was working as an architect. I was working with various different businesses in property and posters and nightclub and various different things, and said, let's give this a go. And if it works, we might do another building. And if it doesn't work, we'll call it a day. And literally two of us started. with the idea of converting the building. We created a new town square, now called Concert Square in Liverpool, putting some bars on the lower floors, a radio station, some loft apartments on the upper floors, an art gallery downstairs, and created the first urban splash scheme, which was a great success. We built it very cheaply. I think the build cost was £27 a square foot. We were literally going to IKEA and buying kitchens and hiring joiners from the street and selling them for 60 grand for 1,000 square foot flat. But they were amazing apartments and the likes of Liverpool never seen. And on the back of that, we really got a bit of momentum, got a bit of publicity, moved back to Manchester and started doing a whole series of different developments.
For those who don't know, Concert Square is an area that I know quite well, being in Liverpool. That's quite an ambitious, it seems anyway, to myself and probably to a lot of people listening, an ambitious first project, because it's a big area and all the things you've run through there, the square being redeveloped, the type of redevelopment that needed to go on, it was in a terrible state before you got your hands on it. How did you end up having such a big project as your first project?
I'd done a few property things before. I bought some terraced houses when I was a student. I developed a few buildings already before I met Jonathan, so that gave me a bit of confidence. But when I met Jonathan, I started to understand more about the power of design and wanted to do something more ambitious and try to think not just about the building, but about the streetscape, about the placemaking, about the city, about the spaces outside the buildings, as well as the space inside the buildings. And those same thoughts have continued with us ever since.
Your schemes are unique in the way that they're designed, that they certainly stand out. The other thing that I think really stands out about them is the locations. And you had a vision about the type of site that you wanted to use. The urban living was something that you were doing before anyone else had really caught on to that. How do you go about sourcing your sites now? Because at the time you were the first to do it, but now it's far more common. How do you identify and secure the sites that are going to work for you?
I mean, sites often find us rather than we finding sites, and being accused of particularly looking for difficult sites and looking for challenges. And I suppose we're interested in regeneration rather than property development. And the difference for me is property development is about fulfilling a demand and regeneration is about creating a demand. We're also interested in not just repeating what we did last year or the year before and trying new different projects. So, I mean, we find sites from all over the places. We like to buy them off market. We often find them with one use and change of the use. We do a lot of competitive bidding where particularly local authorities or the government are bidding for big sites, pitching big sites, we'll bid for those. And we like sites where we believe we can make a difference and where we can believe we can do something that's extraordinary and something that's different to everybody else and not just more the same.
Can you talk us through the design process that you go through? So you find one of these sites and they're all unique. So you don't have a standard apartment that you put into these. Every one of your developments is very different, which makes them really interesting. So what's the process do you go through as a team to say, right, okay, this is how we can get the best use out of this development or this site?
Well, I think first of all, we try to sit down with all the stakeholders, which is often the local community, the local authority, the planners, Historic England are there involved, whoever else might be, local neighbours, whoever else might be involved, and spends the first bit of the time listening to what they want, listening to what the aspirations are, listening to what else is going on in the locality and the area. We then sort of get some ideas of our own about what the vision might be, about what we want to try to achieve, and something that can make a statement, something that can be successful, something that can really work. And then we'll look at recruiting really talented consultants, architects, designers to work alongside us. We'll often have competitions to find those. We'll fill those in with a brief and we'll really push the design teams to get the most we can out of a site and to make sure the site really sings and that actually we can get the best possible end game from the raw ingredients. We also look very strongly and very keenly about what's good about a site and what's not good. What's good, we try to keep. What's not good, we try to replace with something better, something newer. We like sites by water. We like sites with interesting typography. We like sites with interesting old buildings. And we like to make the best of all those attributes.
What are the typical objections that you get from the various people who were involved, and how do you go about overcoming those objections?
Well, usually, to be fair, when people hear Urban Splash is involved, it's good news, and most people welcome us with open arms. So they're not usually objections. Usually people have got legitimate interests and want things out of the site, want things out of the redevelopment, and we try to listen to those. And I won't say we ever give everybody everything they want, but we try to at least listen to what other people want and try to end up with a scheme where everybody feels like they've been part of it, everybody feels like they contributed, and everyone gets something out of the scheme as much as possible. I suppose other objections, we've got an exhibition on now about 25 years of Urban Splash, and it's called It Will Never Work, because on most of the schemes we do, people said it never work. Going back to the first scheme we talked about before, Concert Square, people said it never work. People actually accused us of being evil, forcing people to live in the city centre in Liverpool when no one lived there, forcing people to live in polluted areas, forcing us to put a town square outside. What's anybody going to do with a new town square? We said eat and drink. He says, well, nobody eats and drinks outside. And at the end of the time, they said, well, why is that, you think? They do in Spain, Italy and France. And people said, actually, yeah, but the weather's better there. We actually checked the meteorological records, and sure enough, in northern Italy, it rains much more than it does in Liverpool. And so we've always had a sort of a strong vision about the strength of our thoughts, the strength of our beliefs, and really try to push those through when we felt deeply about something. But by and large, when we come into an area, we are very welcomed, and people like to work with us. And we like to work with all sorts of partners, commercial tenants, artists, local authority, local community, and we find we get a much better scheme out of it by listening to everybody and working with them.
Urban Splash seems to create a tremendous amount of buzz when you launch a new development, and I appreciate that now is partly due to reputation, but you didn't start with one. So how do you generate that buzz where you've had in the past people queuing up for homes? How have you achieved that?
I think with any business, two things are important. One is you've got to get the product right, and secondly, you've got to tell people about it. You can have the best product in the world, but if nobody knows about it, you won't get on. Conversely, you can have the best marketing in the world, but if what you're trying to tell is crap, everybody will find that out sooner or later. So for us, it's about getting the product right and then telling people about it. We've always been quite innovative with our marketing. We're some of the first people to use social media. We were doing big launch events before social media came out. And we've really been trying to articulate and publicise what we do and do it in a really interesting way. We've won many, many awards for our marketing as well as for our design as well as for our business success. It's only great doing something well if people get to enjoy it, and to get people to enjoy it, you need to tell them about it. So, we see the marketing as a very integral part of the success of Urban Splash.
You've done so many different schemes, Tom. Which for you is your favourite? Which stands out of all the schemes you've been involved in?
Well, I always find that a very difficult question, which is my favourite scheme? And the answer I give is always the same one. My favourite schemes are the next one.
Is there one that you have found yourself going back to more over the years, whether through nostalgia or enjoyment? Have you found yourself going back to a particular developmental scheme for whatever reason?
I mean, there are lots and they're all different. I mean, I live in Manchester, so I'm very proud of what we've done in Castlefield. The area of Castlefield now, where our office is, was a really scrappy, not a very nice area of Manchester between Hume and Odsall. We've really transformed that into Canal Side, one of the best places to live in Manchester. Likewise, with the Northern Quarter, we actually came up with the name of the Northern Quarter. We helped redevelop that. We're now working on New Islington and another suburb of Manchester on the edge of the city centre, creating there a marina. We sponsored a free school to bring people with kids in there. We've got a pocket park, the first for 100 years to be built in Manchester. So, they're the ones I probably go to most frequently, but there are other schemes like Fort Dunlop in Birmingham, a great big hulk of a building we brought back to life. Park Hill in Sheffield by the station, 1,000 homes which were really blighted, brought back into great places to live and work now, and landscaping, and hopefully we're going to put an art centre in there. The Midland Hotel in Morecambe, hoping to revive that seaside resort. Lister Mills in Bradford, very tough area of Bradford, bring that back to life on site again there now with the pods on the roof, which is really exciting. Royal Yard in Plymouth, disused docklands, empty for ages, brought back to life. Now the centre of eating and drinking, and probably the best location in Plymouth from what was one of the worst. So they've all had their, challenges, and I'm very, very proud of all of them.
Speaking of challenges, you've accomplished some amazing things, and no one ever accomplishes amazing things without overcoming some fairly significant challenges and setbacks along the way. What are the main things that have gone wrong for you in the history of Urban Splash?
On every scheme, I can talk for hours about all the mistakes we made and what we do differently with the benefit of hindsight. But on the other hand, we never look back at it as anything. I mean, I suppose simply people might say in 2007 we were probably worth way over £100 million, and I could have sold out then. We didn't. A year later, we were worth nothing. In fact, we were worth less than nothing with the global financial crisis, with exactly the same assets and the same income, and just the world changed. So we had to battle our way through that. And for 5 or 6 years, we effectively stopped being property developers and worked for the banks as debt managers. But we worked that out well and worked our way through with the banks in a very conciliatory way, and got over that. And now we're striving ahead again. But every little scheme, we make mistakes, we do things slightly wrong. But I think you've got to look at the end result of what we achieve at the end of the day. And all the buildings we achieve are buildings, I believe, of some real quality that I'm proud of.
So because of all these lessons or mistakes that you've had over the years, if you could go back in time when you were starting out, what advice would you give? Or if you wanted to make it more general, what advice would you give to an aspiring developer?
The first thing is just do it. Yeah, get stuck in and do it. And so many people wait and wait and wait. The second thing is probably become the world expert in property in your street or your district. And go and visit everyone, look on the right move, find every value of everything that happens. Thirdly, really get stuck in yourself. Don't just rely on so-called professionals and leave it to them. Understand every element of it, how things are built, how a plasterer works, how electrics works, how architecture works, how planning works, how building regs works. Get really stuck into the detail. So if anybody asks you about it, you know the answer. And then just persevere. If you believe in something, if you believe a scheme can work, really work hard, really persevere and make the most of it. And be ambitious. Don't try and do what everybody else is doing. Do what you believe is really right. And perhaps most of all, and perhaps the biggest single piece of advice we've always done, is everywhere we've developed, the question we always ask ourselves is, would I like to live here or work here? And if we say yes, we go ahead with it. And if we can't say yes, we don't go ahead with it.
What an incredible man and what an incredible story. And that story is going to continue. That's the most exciting part of this. There's so many words that you could use to describe this interview. Inspiring is an obvious one. But the word, Rob, I'd use is brave, because you have to be brave and bold to achieve these results. Like, these aren't things that happen if you just stay in your comfort zone. Going into some of these city centres that people just would not touch. I know that area of Liverpool well that Tom's redeveloped, and what it was like before. To go in and say, we're not going to just build here, but transform this whole area, and we're going to be the people to do it, is incredible.
I think brave is the perfect word to use, because when you look back at a story like this, it's easy to go, oh yeah, well, it was inevitable and they were in the right place at the right time. But it's so difficult to be the first ones, to be the only ones doing something when everyone is telling you that it will never work. City centre living just wasn't a thing in those cities. They invented it. It's not like they were going into an established residential area where there's lots of demand and then building a few more. They had to create the demand, and they had to create a lifestyle as well. Tom mentioned how they thought, well, people elsewhere in Europe eat and drink outside, and the weather's actually no different when you look into it. So they decided to build it. It reminds me of that Steve Jobs quote that often people don't know what they want until you give it to them. But it's really difficult to do that, because it's natural to think, well, no one else is doing it, so we must be wrong. We must have missed something here. But to actually push on and spend all that money and put all those resources into something when everyone thinks it's never going to work, brave is the only word for that.
So an incredible story about what Tom has done. But we're really excited to tell you that next week we're going to have Tom back on the show and talk about the future. Not his future, but all our futures, the future of UK property investment. Make sure you listen, because he has an incredible insight of how he sees the future of UK property.
So there's been plenty of value in this episode already, but there's a little bit more to come, so Hub Extra coming up in just a second. But first, we always make the time to acknowledge someone who's left us a lovely review over on iTunes. So Rob, who have we got this week?
So a huge thank you to these wonderful hubbers who've left us reviews. First up is Leipnuis, who says, I found a podcast ages ago, and I think Rob and Rob were in their 4th or 5th episode. Since then, I've listened to this podcast during my commute to work, on holiday, on flights, or even when I go jogging. Due to this podcast, I'm currently looking at my first buy-to-let in the UK. Thanks, guys. Well, thank you for listening for so long. I appreciate you sticking with us for so long. And we've also had a review in from Mark the Marathon, who says, feeling the burden associated with providing a secure future for my young family and without financial education, I feel blessed to have found your podcast. For over a year now, I've listened to every podcast, some many times over, and I've read many of the books you've recommended. and your magazine. I've been able to formulate a plan of action based on the goals I've set and having considered the strategies you've discussed. In the last week, I've overcome the fear of risk associated with making my first investment and pulled the trigger in purchasing a property in the Northern Powerhouse. Both Rob and Rob have been there with me every step of the way, and I don't think I would have been able to do it without them. You have my utmost respect and thanks for your concise, detailed and informative, entertaining and supportive podcast. Well, thank you, Mark, and congratulations. That's a cracking review, not because of the words you said, although they are lovely, just from where you've taken yourself to where you are now. It's an incredible journey. Congratulations and well done.
Okay, just time before the end of the show to squeeze in Hub Extra, where every week we like to give you that little bit more, and we back it all up with the Hub Extra email that will hit your inbox on a Friday morning if you're a Property Hub member. Now, earlier, Rob, I introduced this week's Hub Extra as saving you $10,000. Maybe you could spill the beans about what I meant by that.
So this week we're giving you a YouTube video. And this YouTube video is from Gary Vaynerchuk, someone you may have heard us talk about in the past. Gary Vaynerchuk runs businesses in the US, has a big social media following, and has published some fantastic books. But the reason for sharing this video is he also runs a mastermind session called 4Ds. And the 4Ds mastermind session is $10,000 to attend. But as Gary is so big on social, he couldn't help but share this mastermind on YouTube. So, save yourself 10 grand, put an hour aside and watch this mastermind take place. It's really interesting and very tactical. Now, if you haven't got a business, you think, well, why is this for me? Well, if you want to be a property investor or you are a property investor, that is a business. The insights and takeaways you will get from this video can absolutely be replicated in the property world. And if you have a business as well, double win. You can use it for your property business and whatever other activities you have going on. It's a really good video. Gary has a unique style. It won't be for everyone's taste, but get through it. Notepad and pen at the ready because there's some gold in there. Which you would hope so, Rob, for $10,000.
Yeah, you would. I haven't watched it yet. I'll be watching it later. I'll decide then whether it's worth $10,000, but I much prefer the price of free, so thank you for sharing that one. You'll find the link to that video, along with everything else from this episode, in the show notes today, which are at thepropertyhub.net/Tom1. So that is us done for another week. What an episode that was. We've got Tom back again next week, which is going to be fantastic. Make sure you join us for that one and let us know what you'd like us to cover in future. Best way to do that is by telling us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram as Property Hub UK. And to find out what we get up to away from the podcast and how that can help you, join us for our next Discovery webinar, which you can sign up for at thepropertyhub.net/discover. We'll see you next for Ask Rob and Rob on Tuesday. So until then, have a great week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.